My sister stood up at my wedding reception, tapped a fork against her champagne glass until the whole room went dead silent, and said, "I just think everyone here should know who Mara really is." 200 people turned to look at me in my dress. Yeah, in my dress, at my own wedding. I remember the exact sound the room made. Not gasping, not whispering, just silence. The kind that has weight. The kind you can feel pressing on your chest. My new father-in-law set his fork down real slow, like he didn't want the clink to be the thing everybody remembered. I had zero clue in that moment that the next 4 minutes were about to be the most important 4 minutes of my whole life. I thought I was about to get dragged. I had no idea I was about to get recognized by the one guy in that room whose word could undo 12 years of my sister's BS version of my story. So let me back up, because you need the receipts before you can understand what she was about to pull. Name's Mara Whitfield, 29 years old. 11 months before my sister pulled that stunt with the fork, I was a kid who checked the mail with her stomach in knots because half the envelopes had red print on them. Grew up outside Toledo, in a house with a saggy porch and a mom, Carol, who loved my sister Dana the way you love a mirror. Full on, no questions asked, only because of what it reflected back at her. Dana was the golden child. Straight A's without even trying, never got chewed out for slamming a door. I was the other one, the problem child, the one who made things difficult. I'm not saying that to fish for sympathy. I'm saying it because it's just fact, and facts are what this whole story runs on. By 15, my house didn't feel like a home. It felt like a courtroom I never got a turn to speak in. My stepdad, Russ, had a temper that ran on beer and boredom, and my mom had a gift for looking the other way so hard it was basically an art form. Dana had already bounced, moved out 3 years earlier. She'd swing by for holidays smelling like a nicer life, and never once asked why I flinched when Russ raised his voice. 2 streets over lived Ruth Calloway, my grandma on my dad's side, the dad who bounced when I was 4, and no, we're not getting into that, he's not part of this story. Ruth kept a coffee can full of dimes on her windowsill and a spare key under a fake rock that fooled literally nobody. She was the only adult in my life who ever asked me something real and then actually stuck around for the answer. "You're too quiet at dinner," she told me once over grilled cheese. I was 14. "That kind of quiet ain't nothing, Mara. That's a kid doing math on how to survive a room." I didn't cry, just nodded, 'cause she was dead right, and nobody had ever said it out loud before. That's the wound. That's the thing sitting underneath everything else for the next 15 years. Being the one who saw the situation clearly in a family built on not seeing anything, and getting punished for it instead of thanked. The night everything blew up, I was 16. Russ came home loud. My mom went quiet in that specific way that meant duck and cover. And somewhere in the chaos, a kitchen chair got knocked sideways and my wrist got fractured. And I ended up in an ER waiting room at 11 at night, giving a nurse an answer that didn't match my mom's answer 3 feet away. That mismatch is what saved me. A hospital social worker caught 2 different stories from 2 people who were supposed to be on the same page, and she pulled that thread fast. Within a week, there was a hearing. Within a month, a family court judge was deciding where a 16-year-old with a busted wrist was going to live. I remember sitting in a hallway with that fluorescent lighting the color of old teeth, wearing a blazer Ruth bought me the day before because she said, "You gotta look like somebody worth listening to, 'cause you are." And I remember being more scared of that hallway than I ever was of Russ, 'cause Russ was a danger I knew how to read. This was a whole different beast. A room where some stranger in a robe was about to decide my entire life off 20 minutes of testimony. My mom sat on one side of that courtroom. Dana sat next to her, 19, arms crossed. And when it was her turn to talk, she told the judge I exaggerated things, that I'd always been dramatic. That Russ had a temper, sure, but I provoked it. I gotta be real clear on something. I've replayed that sentence in my head for 13 years. She provoked it. About a girl with a fractured wrist. Said by her own sister. Her own blood. The ground didn't just shift under me that day. It opened up completely. The judge, tired eyes, voice that never once went above conversational level, asked me one thing before anything else. He said, "Mara, I've read the reports. I want to hear it from you. Not what happened, what you were afraid of." Nobody had ever come at me like that. Not what happened, what were you scared of? I answered honestly, which caught even me off guard, 'cause I'd planned to keep it small and safe. Told him I was scared that if I told the whole truth, my mom would pick Russ, like she always did, and I'd be the one who got shipped off for stirring the pot. He didn't flinch, wrote something down. 3 weeks later, he ruled I'd live with my grandma Ruth under a protective arrangement. Limited supervised contact with my mom, 0 contact with Russ. My mom cried in that courtroom. Real tears, I think. Though I've never fully trusted the difference in her between real and put on. Dana didn't cry. Dana looked at me across the aisle with a look I didn't have a name for at 16, but I know now. Pure resentment that I got believed. That night at Ruth's kitchen table, same grilled cheese from 2 years back, she told me, "You did the hardest thing a person can do today. You told the truth in a room built to make you doubt it." Then she slid the plate my way. "Eat. You're allowed to be hungry now." I tried calling my mom once, a year later, on Christmas. She picked up, heard my voice, said, "Can't talk right now, Dana's here," and hung up. That was the last real shot I took for a long while. Fast forward 12 years. I built a life, a real, unglamorous, all mine kind of life. Became a physical therapist, paid my own rent, did 4 years with a solid therapist doing the unsexy, repetitive work of learning that getting believed once doesn't magically erase a whole childhood of not being believed. And then I met Daniel. Daniel Ashworth is, patient in a way I didn't even know men could be. Proposed on a random Tuesday, in our kitchen, no ring box theatrics, just, "I've been sure about this for a year, just wanted to make sure you were too." Which had me laughing and crying at the same time, his favorite thing I do, apparently. Here's the plot twist. Daniel's dad, Judge William Ashworth, is, a sitting federal judge. Distinguished, picks his words like he's rationing them. The kind of guy whose opinion carries weight in every room he walks into. Family gatherings included, unfortunately. Didn't connect the dots at first. Federal judges aren't family court judges. Different courts, different robes, different decade of my life entirely. Told myself the man who changed my life at 16 was just a memory, not somebody about to pass me the mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving. 2 weeks before the wedding, my mom called me for the first time in 3 years. She'd heard through the family grapevine exactly who I was marrying into. "A judge's family," she said, like it was a punchline. "Well, ain't that convenient? Guess you finally found people who don't ask questions about where you came from." I hung up on her. Didn't tell Daniel what she said, not 'cause I was hiding it, just didn't clock yet that it was a loaded gun and not just noise. Clocked it 4 days later, when Dana texted asking to be added to the guest list for Mom's sake. And I made the call, the one with real consequences, and said yes. Ruth warned me straight up. "You don't owe her a seat at your table, Mara." I told her I wanted, just once, to prove I'd built something they couldn't touch. Wanted them to watch me be happy and have 0 power over it. Turns out I was dead wrong about how much power a seat at a table can hand somebody. The reception was in a restored barn, string lights everywhere, a band Daniel found because their singer sounded like Nina Simone on a good night. I was 3 glasses of champagne deep into the happiest day of my life when Dana stood up with that fork. "I just think everyone here should know who Mara really is," she said, flashing that smile she's been throwing at me since I was 6. "Looks like warmth from far away, looks like teeth up close." And she told them, all of it, twisted into the ugliest shape possible. That I'd been taken away from our mom as a teenager, that I lived with our grandma 'cause I was too much for the family to handle, that I had a whole history of making things bigger than they were. Pulled out the word dramatic again, 13 years later, like she'd been saving it in her back pocket this whole time. I sat there in my wedding dress and felt 16 all over again. Felt that fluorescent hallway. Felt that specific, lonely helplessness of watching somebody rewrite your survival as your character flaw, in public, with a mic she didn't even need because the room was that quiet. Here's the internal shift, the thing I decided right there in that silence. I wasn't gonna explain myself. Not this time. Spent my whole childhood explaining myself to people who'd already made up their minds before I opened my mouth. I looked down at my plate. Didn't cry, just thought, let her have this one, 'cause it's the last one she's ever getting out of me. That's the choice you can't take back. Whatever happened next, I was done auditioning for my own family's belief. What happened next, I didn't plan, and I want to be straight about that, 'cause it matters that I didn't have to fight this one solo. Judge William Ashworth stood up, didn't even tap his glass, didn't need to. The whole room had already swung toward the head table, toward the guy in the tailored gray suit locking eyes with me in a way I couldn't read yet. I owe everyone an explanation, he said, for why I'm about to say something unusual at my son's wedding. Turned to me. Mara, 16 years old, a fractured wrist, Toledo Family Court, October, 13 years ago. Said it like he was reading off a court docket, then his voice dropped, went softer, more human. I was your judge. Honestly, don't fully remember the sound the room made after that. I remember Daniel's hand finding mine under the table before I even clocked that my hand had started shaking. I've presided over thousands of cases, he said, and there's maybe a dozen I still think about at night. Yours is one of them. Not 'cause it was complicated, it wasn't, once you spoke up. It's one of the dozen 'cause of how much guts it took a terrified 16-year-old to tell a room full of adults, including her own mother, the truth, when every single incentive in that room was pointing her straight toward keeping quiet. He looked at Dana, not mean about it. Judges, Daniel told me later, don't do mean, they do precision, which honestly hits way worse. I also remember, he said, the sister who told that courtroom the victim provoked the abuse. I remember it 'cause that's the kind of testimony that keeps a judge up at night for a whole different reason. Dana's face did something I had genuinely never seen it do before. Went pale, then blotchy, then just froze, like she was scrambling to arrange her face into an expression that hadn't been invented yet for this level of humiliation. I'm not telling this room who Mara was, Judge Ashworth said, turning back to me, voice cracking just slightly, in a way I don't think even he saw coming. I'm telling you who Mara has always been. Somebody who told the truth when it cost her everything. That's not a character flaw. In my courtroom, 13 years ago, that was the single most impressive thing I saw all year. Raised his glass. To my new daughter-in-law, welcome to the family. You more than earned your spot, twice over. The applause that followed wasn't polite golf clap applause. It was the kind that busts out of people almost against their will, relief looking for somewhere to land. Dana sat back down without a word. My mom, 3 seats over, stared at the tablecloth like it owed her an explanation. Neither of them bounced, I'll give them that. Or maybe leaving would have just confirmed the story louder than staying, but neither one said a single word to me the rest of the night. Dana's husband, Todd, leaned over and muttered something I couldn't catch, and she shook her head hard. Universal sign for, not now. What threw me wasn't the vindication. I'd imagined that moment 100 times over the years. In the shower, stuck in traffic, mid-session with my therapist, usually way louder, usually with me dropping some perfect, savage monologue Dana couldn't come back from. What actually threw me was that I didn't want to say a single thing back. That urge to defend myself, the one I'd been carrying since I was small enough to still believe explaining myself harder would eventually work, it just went quiet. Like it finally got permission to clock out. Ruth found me by the dessert table 20 minutes later, holding a slice of cake I had zero intention of eating. Well, she said, guess I don't need to give my toast about you being the strongest person I know. Judge already handled that one. Her eyes were wet. Ruth doesn't cry easy. I'd only seen it twice before, my grandpa's funeral, and that kitchen table 13 years back. Daniel found me last, pulled me onto the dance floor even though the band was on break, and just held me there in the quiet. Said, "I didn't know any of it till tonight. I'm not mad you didn't tell me. I'm just glad you don't gotta carry it solo anymore." Here's the tiny detail I'll remember forever. My mom, heading out that night, stopped at the barn door, looked back at me across the room, and for 1 second, just one, her face almost looked like it wanted to say something true. Then Dana touched her elbow, the moment passed, and they left. It's been 11 months. I wish I could tell you the story wraps up with my mom calling to apologize, or Dana showing up at my door with tears and actual accountability. It doesn't. Haven't spoken to either of them since the wedding. My mom sent a Christmas card with nothing written inside, just her signature, probably the closest she's capable of coming to an olive branch, and I still haven't decided what I'm doing with that. Dana, heard through a cousin, told her own version of the wedding where the judge misunderstood the situation. Doesn't bug me the way it used to. Used to be the thing that'd keep me up. Somebody out there still buying her version. But I've learned I don't need every room to believe me anymore. Needed one room to, once, and I got it. And turns out that's enough to build a whole life on. Ruth comes over for dinner every other Sunday. Last week, she brought that same coffee can, dimes and all, rusting a little more at the seams, and set it on my kitchen windowsill. "For the next kid who needs it," she said. Though we both know she meant it as something else, too. A marker. Proof the story kept going. Judge Ashworth and I don't really talk about that night much. Once, at family dinner, he said, kinda offhand, passing the potatoes, "For what it's worth, I don't remember many faces from the bench. Remembered yours." Then asked Daniel to pass the salt, like he hadn't just handed me something I'm gonna carry for the rest of my life. I'm not that kid doing math on how to survive a room anymore. Still read rooms fast, still catch that specific quiet that means something's off before anybody says a word. Ruth was right. That kind of quiet doesn't just vanish. But it's not fear running the show now. It's just awareness. There's a difference, and it only took me 29 years to figure that out. People love asking what I would have said if the judge hadn't stood up. If I'd have found the words myself, defended myself, flipped the whole room around solo. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe I would have. Maybe I'd have just sat there and let her have it, the way I'd already planned to, and gone home that night and let it be one more thing I carried by myself. Same as everything else. But I think about that hallway a lot. The fluorescent lights, the blazer Ruth bought me the day before, that specific dread of waiting on a stranger to decide if my truth counted for anything. And I think about how the truth doesn't actually need anybody's permission to be true. Sometimes it just needs one other person in the room willing to say so out loud. If you're out here waiting on somebody to recognize what you survived, don't spend your whole life sitting in that hallway waiting on the right person to walk by. Some people already know. You just haven't found the room yet where they're allowed to stand up.